Welcome to Galactic Atlas lore. If you enjoy these tales, please like and subscribe. If you have any recommendations you would like me to explore, please leave a comment. Let's begin. Iron and Blood, the History of the Mandalorians. Chapter 1. The Myth of Mandalore the First. Before there were Mandalorians, before even the name echoed through the Outer Rim as a battle cry or a curse, there were the Taung, a species of grey-skinned, fierce humanoids descended from warriors who once called ancient Coruscant home. They were not native to Mandalore. They were forged in war long before they ever stepped foot upon it. The Taung were known as brutal tacticians and ferocious melee fighters who thrived in conflict. On Coruscant, they clashed for generations with the Zell, the human ancestors of the Republic, in an endless struggle for dominance. This was an age lost to history, spoken of only in myth and fragments of crumbling tablets and battle chants handed down from war leader to war leader. The skies of Coruscant burned during the Great Shadow War, and it was during this apocalyptic clash that the Taung earned their legendary moniker, Warriors in the Shadow. When a volcanic cataclysm devastated the planet's surface, the Taung were cast from their ancestral lands. It was seen not as defeat, but as fate. Their leader, a warlord named Mandalore I, rallied his people to leave Coruscant behind. Rather than be extinguished, they would carve a new home by force, wherever the stars would allow. Their ships pushed into the Outer Rim, far beyond the maps of the Republic and the Jedi. Eventually, they found a planet of wild beasts, violet grasses, and lethal predators, the one that would become their namesake, Mandalore. The world was not easily tamed. In fact, it killed most who dared to live on its surface. But for the Taung, it was a proving ground, a crucible. Mandalore I did not just survive the world, he conquered it. With blade, flame, and relentless will, he led his warriors against the planet's apex predator, a monstrous reptilian beast later called the Mythosaur. In an act of raw defiance, he felled the beast himself, driving a blade through its skull and planting his banner in the blood-soaked soil. This act of dominance forged the myth at the center of Mandalorian identity, strength above all else. The Mythosaur became a symbol, a crest that adorned their armor for millennia, a constant reminder that they were a people who tamed death itself. With that victory, the Taung renamed themselves Mandalorians, taking on not just a new world, but a new purpose: expansion through conquest. Their culture was not built on race, but on warrior ethos. A being could be born into the Taung species and yet be denied the title of Mandalorian if they lacked the will to fight. Conversely, a stranger could be accepted into a clan through combat, loyalty, and adoption of the Resorian life, the 6 tenets that defined Mandalorian life. Mandalore I would not live to see the empire that would rise in his wake, but his name, Mandalore, became a title, a mantle of leadership passed down not through blood but by challenge. A Mandalore was not born, they were made, through war, and war came quickly. Having conquered their own world, the early Mandalorians looked to the stars. Their ideology, known simply as the Way, demanded constant testing. Peace to them was stagnation. Only in conquest could they evolve. With each campaign their ranks grew. Warriors from a dozen species joined their cause. Rodians to Gruta, even humans. All found purpose in the Mandalorian clans. To be Mandalorian was to fight, to wear armor crafted with one's own hands, and to live by the code that strength is truth. Thus began the Mandalorian Crusades. From the Outer Rim they surged inward, Burning across neutral systems and carving out territories through sheer force, their armor evolved, no longer simple plating but fully sealed Beskar suits, capable of standing against lightsabers and blasters alike. Forged in the forges of Mandalore and Concordia, Beskar armor became not just protection but identity. Etched with clan markings, kills, and personal history, each suit told a story. These early centuries gave birth to the clans and houses, semi-autonomous family units ruled by traditions older than the Republic. Among them, Clan Vizsla, Clan Kryze, Clan Wren, and Clan Saxon would come to define the destiny of their people. But even as their influence grew, Mandalorians remained fractured. They were united in creed, but divided in ambition. No central government ruled them, only the word of the Mandalore, and that word could be challenged by anyone strong enough to take it. Mandalore I's death left a vacuum that would never be fully filled again. Each new Mandalore tried to emulate his myth, some becoming paragons of glory, others bringing ruin, and through it all, the blood-soaked culture endured. It was this culture that would eventually draw the attention and ire of the Jedi Order. Faded, and from that moment, the Mandalorian's destiny would be forever changed. Chapter 2: The Crusades and the Old Republic Wars. By the time the Republic took notice of the Mandalorians, it was already too late. The Mandalorian clans had transformed from a scattered warrior culture into a galactic threat. Their crusades, launched under the title of Mandalore the Indomitable, swept through the Outer Rim territories like wildfire, consuming world after world in the name of conquest and strength. What set them apart from mere warlords or pirates was their purpose. They did not raid for plunder or revenge. They fought to prove themselves. Conquest was the measure of life. The Mandalorians' hunger for battle wasn't random. They viewed conflict as a sacred test. Cultures that resisted were respected. Weakness, however, was not tolerated. Entire civilizations were given a choice: fight with honor or be extinguished. Many chose the latter and were never heard from again. When Mandalore the Indomitable rallied the clans under a single banner, it marked the beginning of the Great Crusade, a campaign aimed not just at neighboring worlds, but at the very foundation of the Republic. The Jedi had known of the Mandalorians for centuries, but had mostly avoided direct confrontation. That changed when Mandalorian fleets pushed into Republic-controlled space and attacked the ecumenopolis world of Siracco, annihilating it with kinetic bombardment. The Jedi Council, still reluctant, chose not to engage. But not all Jedi agreed with passivity. A bold, defiant Jedi Knight named Wren, who would later become one of the most complex figures in galactic history, took matters into his own hands. Along with his friend Malak, Wren defied the Council and led a rogue Jedi faction into battle, calling themselves the Revanchists. Their arrival marked a turning point in the war. The Republic, bolstered by Wren's tactical brilliance and forescribed instincts, began to push back. But Mandalore the Indomitable was not easily deterred. His warriors relished the challenge, viewing the Jedi not as mystics, but as worthy prey. The battlefield became a stage for legends. During the course of the war, the Mandalorians evolved even further. They constructed massive basilisk war droids, sentient, semi-autonomous machines capable of atmospheric re-entry and close-quarters mayhem. These mechanical beasts were often ridden like steeds into battle, a terrifying image that struck fear into any who opposed them. Whole planets surrendered rather than face the thunderous descent of basilisk riders. The Outer Rim sieges grew bloodier with each campaign. Mandalore the Indomitable's reach extended across Cathar, Althea, and Juro, leaving a trail of ash in his wake. But it was the genocide of the Cathar species that would come to haunt them. Wren personally witnessed the mass graves and the cruelty of the Mandalorian victory. From that moment forward, he was no longer just a warrior, he was a crusader against the Mandalorians themselves. The final blow came at Malachor V. Wren lured the bulk of the Mandalorian fleet to the Dead World, having constructed a superweapon known as the Mass Shadow Generator. When activated, the device collapsed the planet's gravity well, pulling entire fleets out of the sky and shattering the world's surface. The devastation was catastrophic. Tens of thousands perished in moments. The Mandalorians were broken. Wren defeated Mandalore the Ultimate, the successor to the Indomitable, in personal combat, but in a move that would leave scars for centuries, he refused to let the Mandalorians recover. Wren took Mandalore's mask, the symbol of leadership, and hid it away, preventing any future warrior from claiming the title. Without a Mandalore, the clans fell into chaos and fragmentation. It was a calculated decision, not just to defeat them, but to dismantle their culture from within. The war was over, but the consequences would echo for generations. The Jedi Civil War soon followed, as Wren, corrupted by the dark side, turned against the Republic he had once fought for. And while the galaxy bled once again, the Mandalorians scattered across the stars, shattered and disillusioned. Some became bounty hunters. Others turned mercenary. A few, clinging to the old ways, tried to rebuild the clans in exile. But Mandalore was quiet, empty, lost. Yet even in defeat, the Mandalorian spirit endured. It festered, adapted, waited. Because Mandalorians did not believe in endings, only in trials, and the loss of their homeworld was just another trial, one they would overcome. They always did. Chapter 3. The Mandalorian Excision. In the aftermath of the Mandalorian Wars and the Jedi Civil War, the galaxy reeled, but the Republic was not satisfied with simply defeating the Mandalorians on the battlefield. Their war machine had cut too deep. Their ideology had burned too bright. If the Mandalorians were to rise again, it could not be through conquest, but from the shadows. And so, the Republic initiated what would be remembered by Mandalorians as the Mandalorian Excision, a coordinated campaign not just of disarmament, but cultural annihilation. The war had left Mandalore scorched, its once vibrant cities reduced to smouldering wreckage. Many of the clans had fled into the stars, their ranks thinned and scattered. The Republic's objective was simple: ensure the Mandalorians could never again unite under a single leader or ideology. To that end, the Jedi Council authorized raids on known Mandalorian enclaves, striking at hidden forges, ancient archives, and sacred shrines. The Jedi believed they were preserving peace. The Mandalorians called it sacrilege. Entire histories were lost, artifacts melted down, songs unsung. But for all their devastation, the Jedi misunderstood the essence of Mandalorian identity. It could not be erased by fire or forgotten by decree. It lived not in structures or scrolls, but in the creed passed from warrior to warrior, parent to foundling. The Resolnare endured. In exile, the Mandalorians began a quiet rebirth. On distant worlds like Ordo, Shogun, and the moons of Concordia, clans reassembled in secret. They became mercenaries, bodyguards, and bounty hunters, selling their talents to warlords, huts, and planetary militias. Their armor changed, less ornamental, more practical, but the iron soul beneath it remained. Even without a unifying leader, they remained deadly, honorable in their own ruthless way. Among the Jedi, a division formed. Some believed the Mandalorians could never be trusted again. Others saw the cost of their suppression as too great, recognizing that cultural obliteration had created something more dangerous: Mandalorians with no home, no cause. Only vengeance. Still, a few warriors carried the old vision of Mandalore in their hearts. Quietly they searched for the mask of Mandalore, still missing since Wren had hidden it. To hold the mask was to hold legitimacy, but none could find it. Not yet. As centuries passed, Mandalorian identity became even more fragmented. Some adopted new creeds, others swore loyalty to ancient houses long thought extinct. But even in their division, certain constants held firm. Clan loyalty, family whether by blood or adoption, was sacred. a Mandalorian without a clan, was adrift. Armor as identity, Beskar Gam, the iron skin, was more than protection, it was a record of a warrior's soul. Combat as tradition, trial by combat, remained the most honored form of judgment and succession. Children of the Raisonnaire, even scattered, they taught the 6 tenets: wear armor, speak the language, raise children as Mandalorians, contribute to the clan, defend yourself and your family, and rally to the Mandalore when called. There were whispers during this era of a new warlord rising. Candorus Ordo, a veteran of the Mandalorian Wars who had served both Mandalore the Ultimate and later Revan. In the shadows of the KOTOR era, Ordo recovered the lost mask and declared himself Mandalore the Preserver. He began to rebuild the clans, slowly and quietly, understanding that open conquest was no longer possible. Survival required patience. He gathered warriors from across the Outer Rim, forging a secret Mandalorian enclave on Zun, the jungle moon of Onderon. There, far from the eyes of the Republic and Jedi alike, the culture was preserved, not as a nation, but as a people, hidden, watchful, waiting. Clandarati's leadership ensured that Mandalorian identity survived the excision. He would not live to see the clans rise again in full, but his actions guaranteed that they could. And so the Mandalorians endured, not as conquerors, but as ghosts. Their stories were passed down in low-lit forges and wind-scoured deserts. Their armor bore new scars, but the code beneath it remained unbroken. The Republic believed the excision had ended the Mandalorian threat. They were wrong. The Mandalorians had simply changed. And in the shadows of the coming centuries, new factions would emerge, some seeking to restore the old ways, others yearning for peace. And one of those would rise to define Mandalore's fate in the age of the Clone Wars. Chapter 4: Clans, Codes, and the Way. To understand the Mandalorians, one must understand that their true strength never came from armies or weapons, but from structure. Their culture was not built on government, but on a framework of honor, clan loyalty, and shared creed. Even when fragmented across the stars, even when their homeworld was lost or occupied, what bound the Mandalorians was not a flag or planet, but identity. At the heart of that identity was the Resonare, the 6 actions. These were not religious edicts or dogma, they were lived values, a warrior's compass. Wear the armor, not for vanity, but as a second skin, a legacy passed down or earned. Armor was sacred, modified across generations and sometimes centuries. Speak the language, Mandalore was the soul of the people. Even a child who could not yet lift a blaster was expected to know the tongue of the ancestors. Raise children as Mandalorians. Foundlings were sacred. A rescued child, regardless of species or origin, could be brought into the clan through right and care. Contribute to the clan's welfare. Whether as warrior, smith, pilot, or strategist, every Mandalorian had a duty to their family unit. Defend yourself and your family. Strength protected freedom. The right to bear arms was not just expected, it was necessary. Rally to the Mandalore when called. Should a true leader rise to carry the ancient mantle, all Mandalorians were honor-bound to answer. Above the clan stood the Mandalore, the sole ruler. Unlike monarchs or dictators, the Mandalore was a symbol, elected or claimed through strength and often challenge. One did not inherit the title, one had to earn it, usually through combat or through recovering an ancient symbol of rule such as the Darksaber or the Mask of Mandalore. Beneath this title were the clans, vast extended families that functioned as the backbone of society. Clans had ancestral homes, forges, banners, and often feuded or allied based on shared history. Among the most prominent, Clan Vizsla, fierce, aggressive, and possessors of the Darksaber for generations, known for leading the Death Watch. Clan Kryze, regal, intellectual, and reformist, at one time the royal family of Mandalore, through Duchess Satine. Clan Wren, artists and warriors, later known for figures like Sabine Wren, whose loyalty to Mandalore helped rekindle the flame. Clan Saxon, loyal to the Empire during occupation, ruled parts of Mandalore with authoritarian zeal. Clans were grouped into houses, larger political and cultural factions such as House Vizsla, House Kryze, and others. Clans could shift allegiance between houses based on politics, marriage, or ideology. The armor Beskar Gam was more than a defensive suit. Forged from Beskar, the rare iron of Mandalore, it could resist lightsabers, blasters, and time itself. Blacksmithing was a revered profession, often passed down with strict codes. To forge one's own armor was a rite of passage. Helmets were especially sacred. Many Mandalorians never removed them in the presence of outsiders, believing the act to be a surrender of identity. The Way of the Mandalore, also known as the Way, was a more devout, rigid form of tradition. It had many interpretations. Some followed it dogmatically: no helmet removed, no compromise with outsiders. Others saw it as metaphor, embracing the philosophy but adapting to circumstance. This divergence would eventually divide Mandalorians into traditionalists and reformists. Yet there were constants: family above politics, honor in battle, protection of foundlings, loyalty to clan before all else. Even in exile, these tenets endured. Throughout this cultural framework, the Mandalorians maintained a warrior's pragmatism. They welcomed diversity: non-humans, droids, orphans of war. Any being could become Mandalorian if they followed the Resolnare. The concept of a foundling was central, a child rescued in battle and adopted into a clan. Many of the greatest Mandalorian warriors were not born of Mandalorian blood, but forged in Mandalorian fire. This adaptability ensured their survival. While Jedi and Sith rose and fell, while empires burned and republics crumbled, the Mandalorians endured, not as conquerors, but as survivors. Their home world might change hands, their government might collapse, but as long as there was a forge, a creed, and a clan, Mandalore lived. It was this spiritual endurance that set the stage for the next great chapter in their story, a time of peace, forced peace, under a pacifist duchess, and the violent backlash it would create. Chapter 5: The Rise of the Darksaber. Among the many legends of Mandalorian history, few shine brighter or cast darker shadows than that of the Darksaber. More than a weapon, it was a symbol of unity and rule, a challenge and a promise. Its blade hummed with the voice of history, and every Mandalorian who laid eyes upon it knew they were seeing something sacred, something forged in fire and defiance. The story begins with a single warrior, Tare Vizsla. He was unique in the galaxy, perhaps even singular, a Mandalorian born into Clan Vizsla, but taken as a child into the Jedi Order. This alone was a rare occurrence. Most Jedi younglings were drawn from worlds steeped in Republic ideals or strong in Force tradition. Mandalorian children were considered too aggressive, too loyal to their culture, too dangerous to mold. But Tare was different. Gifted in the Force, yes, but also brilliant, disciplined, and fiercely committed to his identity as a Mandalorian, even as he walked the polished stone halls of the Jedi Temple. He rose quickly, becoming a Jedi Knight and later, so the archives claim, a Jedi Master and member of the High Council. But his most lasting legacy was not a teaching or a treaty. It was a blade. The Darksaber. Forged by Tar himself in the Jedi Temple, it was unlike any lightsaber. Its flat, black blade shimmered like obsidian, crackling with a white halo. Its hilt was angular and heavier than most, designed for a warrior accustomed to traditional Mandalorian weapons. It pulsed with power and a will of its own, perhaps influenced by its creator's conflicted nature. The Darksaber was not just a weapon, it was a challenge to the Jedi, a declaration that a Mandalorian could be more than a warlord or mercenary, that he could master the Force and shape the galaxy through both faith and fire. When Tare died, the Jedi sealed the Darksaber in the temple's vault, where it was meant to be forgotten, but Clan Vizsla did not forget. Sometime during the fall of the Old Republic, members of Clan Vizsla stormed the Jedi Temple during a galactic conflict, stealing the Darksaber and returning it to Mandalore. From that day forward, it became a symbol of rulership, not by birth but by combat. Any warrior who claimed the Darksaber in battle could claim the title of Mandalore. But the act of taking it required more than strength. It demanded resolve, honor, belief in the creed. In the centuries that followed, the Darksaber passed through many hands. Some wielded it wisely, guiding the clans through turbulent times. Others sought it out of ambition, bringing ruin in their wake. Clan Vizsla considered it their birthright, and many of its members used it to unite the clans. But unity among Mandalorians was always temporary. During the new Mandalorian reforms, an era of peace enforced by Duchess Satine Kryze, the Darksaber vanished from public life. Satine, a pacifist ruler, rejected the weapon's symbolism, choosing diplomacy over strength. Her rule divided Mandalorians. Some saw her as visionary, others as traitor. Chief among her enemies was Pre Vizsla, a descendant of Tar and leader of Deathwatch, a militant splinter faction determined to return Mandalore to its warrior roots. Pre Vizsla possessed the Darksaber and used it as a rallying symbol. With it, he gained influence, allies, and eventually a partnership with an unlikely figure, Maul, the former Sith apprentice once known as Darth Maul, now re-emerged with his own army and vision. Vizsla and Maul overthrew Duchess Satine through subterfuge and brute force. Mandalore was thrown into civil chaos, but Vizsla made a mistake. He underestimated Maul. In a duel witnessed by the Mandalorian elite, Maul defeated Pre Vizsla and took the Darksaber. By ancient custom, this made him Mandalore. The warrior clans were horrified, but most, bound by tradition, accepted Maul's leadership. It was a dark chapter in Mandalorian history, ruled not by one of their own, but by a former Sith, a foreigner, a manipulator of shadows. Only a few resisted. Satine Kryze, sister of Duchess Satine and a former Deathwatch lieutenant, rejected Maul's claim and led a rebellion. This insurrection would later align with the Republic, leading to the Siege of Mandalore, a climactic campaign that saw Maul defeated and Mandalore freed, at least briefly. The Darksaber was lost again during this conflict, hidden away in the ashes of war. But the legend never died. Though the weapon would resurface decades later in the hands of Sabine Wren, a young Mandalorian artist and warrior of Clan Wren who discovered it on Dathomir. Guided by Kanan Jarrus, a surviving Jedi, Sabine learned to wield it not just as a sword but as a symbol. She later passed the blade to Bo-Katan, hoping she would reunite the clans once more. But Mandalorian unity is a fragile thing. Some argued that to wield the Darksaber one must win it in combat, or its power would be hollow. Others claimed that destiny, not blood or challenge, determined the bearer. Even in the time of the Empire and the New Republic, the Darksaber remained a potent symbol of identity, rule, and burden. It was not simply a lightsaber. It was Mandalore's soul, captured in a single blade. To hold it was to inherit the weight of all Mandalorian history, and not all were strong enough to bear it. Chapter 6. The Fall into Civil War. For a people forged in war, peace was always the most volatile threat. It was not invasion, nor the Jedi, nor even the loss of their planet that nearly broke the Mandalorians. It was a civil divide over what it meant to be Mandalorian at all. The cracks began to show during the era of the so-called New Mandalorians, a movement that rose from the ashes of war, built upon the belief that survival required not strength but change. In the aftermath of centuries of conflict, Mandalore's surface was reduced to scorched glass, barely habitable. The planet was bleeding, and with the clans scattered and leaderless, those who remained turned inward. The new Mandalorians, led by Duchess Satine Kryze, emerged with a radical idea: that Mandalore could be a society of diplomacy, neutrality, and peace, They disavowed armor, abandoned weapons, and cloaked themselves in sleek fabrics and intellectual ideals. For a time, their vision worked. Domed cities rose on Mandalore's fragile surface. Commerce resumed. The Jedi, ever fond of pacifism, supported Satine's government. But not all agreed. Among those who opposed her was a group that believed peace was nothing but surrender dressed in silk. These warriors, once proud defenders of Mandalorian tradition, felt betrayed. They became Death Watch, a militant faction determined to overthrow Satine and restore the warrior way. At their head stood Pre Vizsla, wielder of the Darksaber and descendant of Taref Vizsla himself. Death Watch operated from the moon Concordia, hidden in plain sight, masquerading as miners while secretly building an army. Their operatives trained in secret, preserving the old armor, the old tongue, and the ancient ways. Their creed was direct: strength through conflict, unity through conquest. Mandalore must be strong. The ideological split between new Mandalorians and traditionalists was not just cultural, it became violently political. Assassinations, sabotage, and public uprisings became commonplace. Satine refused to militarize, even as they fractured the very society she sought to preserve. Into this storm walked Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Knight and former lover of the Duchess. His arrival complicated matters, both because of his past with Satine and because of growing whispers that Mandalore's neutrality was a front for civil unrest. Obi-Wan's involvement and that of the Jedi Order deepened the divide between factions. When Death Watch could not topple Satine alone, they turned to outsiders, specifically Maul and his brother Savage Opress, exiled Sith with their own ambitions. Maul offered strength, and Pre Vizsla, though wary, accepted. With their combined forces, they orchestrated a violent coup. Death Watch seized power in the capital. Satine was imprisoned. The people, weary of instability, welcomed the return of order, unaware of the cost. But Maul had his own designs. In one of the most infamous events in Mandalorian history, Maul challenged Pre Vizsla in the throne room. By Mandalorian law, such a challenge was valid. Vizsla accepted. They fought, not as politicians but as warriors. And Maul won. He beheaded Vizsla with the Darksaber, took the weapon, and claimed the title of Mandalore. This act shattered the clans. Some, bound by tradition, knelt to Maul. Others, like Satine Kryze, refused to serve an outsider. She branded those who followed Maul as traitors and formed a resistance movement, leading a splinter of Death Watch against their former allies. Mandalore plunged into civil war. Families turned on families, clans splintered overnight. The capital was turned into a battleground, its polished floors stained with fire and ash. The Jedi did not intervene, at first, but as the conflict spread and Maul consolidated power, the Republic was forced to act. Ahsoka Tano, exiled from the Jedi Order, led a clone battalion under Captain Rex in the legendary Siege of Mandalore. It was one of the bloodiest battles in the Clone Wars. Maul was defeated, captured by Ahsoka, and the planet was left in the hands of Bo-Katan and her loyalists. But peace was not to be. Mere weeks later, the Republic fell. Order 66 was issued. The Jedi were purged, and Darth Sidious, now Emperor, turned his gaze to Mandalore. Bo-Katan refused to bow to the new empire. Her defiance was met with force. Imperial legions descended upon Mandalore, loyal clans were hunted, cities occupied, forges seized. The Great Purge had begun, not just of people but of identity. The Darksaber vanished once again, taken by the Empire. Beskar was harvested for Imperial use. Mandalore became a memory. And the survivors? They went underground. The Civil War had broken Mandalorian unity. Maul's rule, the betrayal of Death Watch, and the pacifist legacy of Satine had left the people scattered and bitter. Some became bounty hunters, others hid among the stars. A few clung to ancient rites, living in secrecy, protecting foundlings, never removing their helmets. These would become the children of the Watch, carrying forward the Way in its most rigid form. Mandalore was no longer a place, it was a creed. Chapter 7. Under Siege, the Clone Wars and Maul's Rule. The Clone Wars, raging across the galaxy, reached Mandalore not through the will of the Republic or the Separatists, but through the ambitions of an outsider. Maul, once the Sith apprentice of Darth Sidious, had returned from death, rebuilt in hatred driven by vengeance and seeking purpose. That purpose found root in Mandalore, a culture he both respected and intended to exploit. When Death Watch under Pre Vizsla turned to Maul for assistance in toppling Duchess Satine, it was a desperate gamble. Vizsla believed he could control the Sith warrior, but Maul, even wounded and exiled, still carried the teachings of the Sith. Betrayal is not the exception, it is the end game. The alliance led to chaos by design. Death Watch and Maul's Shadow Collective, a criminal coalition of the Pike Syndicate, Black Sun and the Crimson Dawn, instigated a violent uprising in Sundari, the domed capital of Mandalore. The people, desperate for order amid orchestrated chaos, welcomed Pre Vizsla's liberation. The pacifists were dethroned, Satine was imprisoned, and Death Watch claimed power. But then came the duel. In the throne room of Sundari, Maul challenged Pre Vizsla. By Mandalorian custom, it was a fair claim. Vizsla, proud and confident, accepted. He fought hard, but Maul, trained in the dark side and fueled by revenge, struck him down. Before the stunned gaze of Death Watch's elite, Maul took the Darksaber from Vizsla's lifeless hand. Tradition demanded they follow him, but not all did. Satine Kryze, Satine's sister and a high-ranking member of Death Watch, rejected Maul's right to rule. He is not Mandalorian, she declared, and with a faction loyal to her ideals, she fled, forming a resistance to reclaim Mandalore. She knew what was coming next. Maul ruled from Sundari's throne, his dark vision shaping Mandalore into a state of fear and surveillance. He installed a puppet government led by Almec, once a disgraced prime minister, now a willing collaborator. The Shadow Collective enforced Maul's will, and Mandalore's forges worked again, not for honor, but for criminal enterprise and galactic manipulation. In a final act of cruelty, Maul lured Obi-Wan Kenobi to Mandalore. In the very prison where Satine was held, Maul executed her before Obi-Wan's eyes. It was not just vengeance, it was a lesson. Maul had destroyed Kenobi's world as the Jedi had once destroyed his. The cost of neutrality was now carved into Mandalorian blood. But Maul's arrogance would bring his fall. Unbeknownst to him, Bo-Katan sent a transmission to the Republic, and though the Jedi Council refused to intervene officially, Ahsoka Tano, no longer a Jedi, answered the call. Backed by clone Captain Rex and the elite 332nd Company, Ahsoka launched the Siege of Mandalore, the final major conflict of the Clone Wars. What followed was brutal urban warfare inside the domes of Sundari. Clone troopers clashed with Maul's loyalists in narrow corridors and glass skyways. The city burned, and the skies filled with wreckage and fire. Ahsoka hunted Maul through the city's underbelly, and in a duel beneath the shattered dome, captured him using Mandalorian technology, not the Force, to bind him. Mandalore was free, but only for a moment. The siege concluded just as Order 66 was executed. The Jedi were branded traitors, the Republic fell, the clones turned on their commanders, Ahsoka and Rex escaped, but the Jedi were gone, and into the power vacuum stepped a new ruler, the Empire. Bo-Katan refused to submit to Imperial rule, and for her defiance she was stripped of her title. Imperial governors were installed. Stormtroopers replaced Mandalorians. The forges of Mandalore were turned to serve Palpatine's war machine. Culture was stamped out. Heritage was rewritten. The clans, disarmed or exiled, fractured once again. Maul escaped Imperial capture and vanished into the galaxy's underworld, but the damage was done. His manipulation had turned Mandalorians against each other in a war that no outsider could have engineered so efficiently. The cost was more than lives or cities, it was identity. the fall of Satine, the betrayal of Deathwatch, the war that split the clans. All of it left scars that would echo for decades. The Darksaber vanished once again, spirited away during the chaos. But its legend only grew stronger in absence. Now, scattered across the stars, Mandalorians became whispers, warriors turned mercenary, honor-bound people turned hunted. Some, like Bo-Katan, clung to old hope. Others, like the Children of the Watch, turned inward, embracing the way with newfound zealotry, never removing their helmets, raising foundlings, preserving what they could. The siege of Mandalore was the end of one era and the beginning of another. A people without a planet, a creed without a throne. But, as always, Mandalorians would endure. In silence, in armor, in fire. Chapter 8. Empire, Oppression, and the Purge. Mandalore, once ruled by fire and honor, fell under the suffocating silence of imperial control. After the Republic's fall and the birth of the Galactic Empire, what remained of the Mandalorian people was divided, scattered, and demoralized. The Empire wasted no time in turning their fractured world into an occupied province. To the Emperor, Mandalore was not a sovereign world, it was a resource, a threat to be contained, a culture to be mined, suppressed, and erased. Governor Gar Saxon, a Mandalorian loyal to the Empire and descendant of Clan Saxon, was appointed as Imperial Viceroy of Mandalore. His loyalty was rewarded with control, but that control came at a cost. He ruled not as Mandalore, but as a puppet, wielding fear backed by stormtroopers, TIE fighters, and orbital bombardment. Many of the traditional clans, Vizsla, Wren, Rook, Eldar, refused to kneel, and those who resisted were labeled traitors, their banners outlawed, their armor confiscated. The forges were no longer sacred spaces. They were commandeered, repurposed to refine Beskar, the indestructible Mandalorian iron, into armor plating for imperial elite. Centuries of craftsmanship were melted down for profit. The Empire feared Beskar in Mandalorian hands. In imperial hands, it became a tool of control. The Great Purge, or as some called it, the Night of 1,000 Tears, was not a single battle. It was a campaign of terror, systematic and deliberate. Imperial super-commanders rained fire from the skies upon key cities, including Sundari, leveling ancient halls and annihilating clan strongholds. Records were lost, libraries turned to ash, great warrior lines were snuffed out in a night. Mandalorians were hunted in their own cities. Those who surrendered were disarmed, enslaved, or forced to serve under imperial banners. Those who escaped fled to remote corners of the galaxy, Concord Dawn, Kalevala, Gargorn, and beyond, living in hiding, maintaining the way in secret. The Darksaber, long absent, resurfaced during this time, wielded by Gar Saxon himself. He used it as a symbol of imperial legitimacy, though many Mandalorians viewed this as heresy. The Darksaber was not a medal to be issued by a tyrant, it was a trial, a fire to be won. Saxon had not earned it in combat, he had been gifted it by the Empire. To the clans this was an insult. But among the darkness, resistance flickered. Sabine Wren, a young warrior of Clan Wren, rose from exile after fleeing imperial academies and returning to her family with the Darksaber in hand. She had found it not on Mandalore, but on Dathomir, left in the ruins of Maul's lair. At first she wanted nothing to do with it, but under the guidance of a Jedi Kanan Jarrus, and with support from Heldin heritage, a return to Mandalore set fire to a spark that had long been buried. She used the Darksaber to unite the clans, at least for a time, challenging Gar Saxon, defeating him in single combat, and giving the blade to Satine Kryze, believing her the true leader Mandalore needed. Bo-Katan's acceptance marked the last hope for a united Mandalorian resistance. But hope was not enough. When Bo-Katan refused imperial rule and declared Mandalore's independence, the Empire responded with ruthless finality. Massive orbital strikes rained down from star destroyers. The capital was turned to dust. Survivors of the purge spoke of black-clad death troopers, war droids, and fire that never stopped falling. This was the Great Purge, and it ensured Mandalore would not rise again, at least not in the Empire's time. Bo-Katan vanished, the Darksaber disappeared, Mandalorians were scattered to the stars, most becoming nomads or mercenaries. Some clans, like the Wrens, continued to fight alongside the rebellion. Others retreated deeper into hiding, forming cult-like groups with strict adherence to the ancient way. The most notable of these was the Children of the Watch, a secretive faction who returned to the oldest traditions, never removing helmets, preserving the raison d'être, and raising foundlings as the highest calling. To them, Mandalore was not just a place, but a faith. Their watchword, "This is the way." The Empire's downfall did not restore Mandalore. By then, the damage had been done. The world was believed uninhabitable, bombed into oblivion. Few dared to return. Even fewer believed anything was left to rebuild. But the culture, as it always had, survived in exile. The purge was not the end of the Mandalorians. It was their greatest trial. And the way endures through trial. Chapter 9. The Creed lives on. The Empire fell, as all empires do. With the death of Palpatine at Endor and the destruction of the second Death Star, the galaxy changed. A fledgling new republic rose from the wreckage, promising freedom and renewal. But for the Mandalorians, it was not deliverance. The purge had left them shattered, rootless and exiled. The surface of Mandalore remained glassed, lifeless, or so it was believed. Those few who dared return found nothing but ruins, scorched stone, and fields of ash beneath a poisoned sky. The Great Purge had burned away not only the cities, but the spirit of unity. Yet the Creed survived. In the deep outer rim, in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, Mandalorians endured. Some lived in hidden colonies, moving silently between systems, working as bounty hunters, bodyguards, and mercenaries. Others became blacksmiths and teachers, preserving the culture in whispers and rituals. The most devout formed covens and enclaves, secretive groups who followed ancient lore with near religious fervor. Foremost among them were the Children of the Watch. To outsiders, they seemed like zealots, never removing their helmets, isolating themselves from galactic affairs, and clinging to customs most believed extinct. But to the children, they were not extremists. They were keepers of the flame. Their watchword, "This is the way," was not a slogan, it was truth. They trained in the raison d'être, took foundlings into their ranks, and lived in strict adherence to the way of Mandalore, even as the wider galaxy forgot their name. Their creed was simple: Mandalorians are not born, they are made, through action, through faith, through armor. One such warrior, Din Djarin, known simply as the Mandalorian, emerged from this hidden world. A foundling rescued during the Clone Wars by Death Watch, Djarin was raised among the Children of the Watch. His armor was pieced together from reward and ritual. His silence was reverence. He lived by the creed with solemn discipline, believing that to be Mandalorian was not a birthright but a life's work. When Djarin accepted a contract to retrieve a mysterious target, a child, species unknown, strong in the Force, he could not have known he was setting Mandalore's future in motion. For the child, known as Grogu, awoke something long buried in Djarin. A sense of legacy. Foundlings were sacred. To abandon the child was unthinkable. So he ran. He broke the bounty hunter code. He protected the child with his life. This single act of honor sparked a series of events that would reconnect the scattered Mandalorian threads. Through Djarin, the Darksaber resurfaced. In a duel aboard Moff Gideon's cruiser, Din defeated the Imperial warlord and, unknowingly, claimed the weapon. According to ancient custom, he became Mandalore, though he had no desire for the title. Satine Kryze, who had spent years trying to reunite the clans, refused to accept the blade unless earned in combat. The legend held the Darksaber could only pass through battle or its power was hollow. conflict simmered once more. Djarin, reluctant and confused, sought answers. He bathed in the living waters beneath the mines of Mandalore, seeking redemption for having removed his helmet. In doing so, he confirmed a truth long denied. Mandalore was not cursed. It lived, and within its caverns stirred ancient forces, dormant yet watching. The mythosaur, the beast slain by Mandalore I, was glimpsed again. Hope returned. Plans once thought extinguished began to stir. Survivors emerged. The armorer, spiritual leader of the Children of the Watch, declared it time for reunification, for the clans to return, for Mandalore to rise not just as a world but as a people. The Darksaber, still carried by Din Djarin, became a symbol of this fragile rebirth. But unity would not come easily. Bo-Katan and the armorer, long at odds, stood together only in necessity. The scars of Maul's betrayal, the Empire's purge, and internal division ran deep. The question of who should lead remained unanswered. Yet the creed endured. Whether in the hands of warriors, foundlings, smiths, or silent sentinels, Mandalorian culture lived through devotion. In a galaxy where the Force and politics often define destiny, the Mandalorians stood apart. They were not chosen, they chose. Chose to wear armor, chose to speak the language, chose to live by fire and forge. They were not a species, not a flag. They were a creed. And that creed whispered across battlefields, through cold forges, and in the minds of every child taken in and taught. Strength is life. Honor is survival. This is the way. Chapter 10. The Future of Mandalore. Mandalore, once a word whispered in fear, later pitied in ruin, now stirred with new breath. In the aftermath of empire, of civil war and exile, the clans began to return, not in triumph, but in resilience. They came not to rebuild the throne, but to rebuild the soul. The broken cities, scorched wastelands and shattered mines stood like scars across a wounded body. But even scars to the Mandalorians are marks of survival. The Darksaber, still the symbol of unification, found itself again at the heart of this rebirth. Yet it was no longer a simple answer to the question of leadership. Its weight had proven divisive as much as it had been inspiring. Bo-Katan Kryze, long the would-be ruler of a restored Mandalore, finally accepted that strength could not be forced by tradition alone. When Din Djarin, who had no thirst for power, relinquished the Darksaber to her through deed rather than ambition, it signaled not a coronation, but a shift. Unity would come not from a single figure, but from shared creed, from mutual purpose. The clans, Kryze, Wren, Vizsla, Eldar, and others once thought lost, began forging ties. Broken allegiances were mended through shared labor, the rebuilding of domed cities and the cleansing of ancient sites. Beneath the ruins of Sundrari, new settlements emerged, humbler than the palaces of old, but rich in intent. The living waters became a place of ritual again. Forges were relit, not for war, but for legacy. For the first time in generations, Mandalorians of different creeds, those who removed their helmets and those who did not, stood side by side. It was not perfect. Distrust lingered, but the way endured because it evolved. Some kept to the ancient paths, others interpreted the creed through new eyes. Both lived as Mandalorians. In this new era, the foundling once again became central. Children, taken in from across the galaxy, were trained not just in combat, but in the meaning of the Resonere. Language, honor, craftsmanship, loyalty, these were their inheritance. Mandalore was not defined by bloodlines. It never had been. It was defined by choice, by action. Beyond their world, the galaxy remained in flux. The new republic struggled to fill the void left by the Empire. Fragmented remnants of imperial rule still festered in the corners of space. Conflict was inevitable, but the Mandalorians had learned the cost of fighting each other. Now they stood ready to face external threats, united, if not under a single banner, then under a shared purpose. The Darksaber, ultimately destroyed in battle, proved a fitting metaphor. Its legacy had bound and broken too many. Its shattering freed them from its weight. Mandalorians no longer needed a relic to define them. Their survival was proof enough. And what of Mandalore itself? The planet remained harsh, its environment unstable. But Mandalorians had never needed paradise. They thrived in adversity. They built beneath the surface, adapted their domes to the new climate, and reworked old mines into habitable sanctuaries. The forges ran hot with new Beskar. War banners hung not as symbols of conquest, but of remembrance. The way moved forward. Mandalore was no longer a throne to be seized. It was a place to be earned, through rebuilding, through legacy, through the creed. Mandalorians who had grown up in hiding returned to walk its soil for the first time. Children of foundlings carved their first armor plates. Smiths taught history not with words, but with molten iron. Some whispered that the mythosaur, the great beast of legend, still stirred beneath the planet's crust. If true, it was not a threat, but a promise. The Mandalorians were no longer a scattered people clinging to ruins. They were a fire, slow-burning but eternal. And if the galaxy would forget again, if the Republic or the next empire tried to erase them once more, Mandalorians would answer, as they always had. Not with surrender, not with complaint, but with resolve. Because Mandalore is not a planet, Mandalore is a people, and this is the way.